Hey, church, I just want to briefly touch base with you on three important things that are going on in our church life right now. Things that you would be getting updates on Sunday morning in person, should we be gathering in person. Three things I just want to touch base on real quick as I've heard from many of you and your prayers for us and our church and concern for us and our church. I just want to say thank you, and I want to make sure that we're being really clear and in the front of things as we move forward through the phased plans as Governor Inslee has made known to our state as we reopen Washington. Also, just want to touch base briefly on our church finances, as I know that that's a concern that many of you have expressed. And then finally, want to just give an update on the building, where we're at in that, and our plans moving forward. And before we step into those three things, I just want to tell you that we are a church that's rooted in the gospel and oriented around the Great Commission. We will always be a church that is deeply rooted in the gospel, believing that there is life transformation, abundant life that comes through faith in Jesus, and oriented around making that truth known. And our stated mission as a church is to make disciples of all ethnic backgrounds, seeing those disciples mobilized for life, to love God passionately, to invest in others selflessly, to fulfill their calling uniquely, and to embrace God's mission completely. We're about the great commandment, loving God with passion and loving others, investing in others selflessly. We're also about the Great Commission, right? That you would fulfill your calling, your place in that mission, and that you would embrace God's mission completely. And that truth was true 6 months ago. It was true 2.5 years ago when we launched our church, and that truth is still true today. That we are a church that is about that mission, making disciples and seeing those disciples mobilized for life. And so whether we're in phase 1 or phase 4 or somewhere in between those phases, that's the mission that we're going to be about, and we're going to continue to be about, both in your life and in your home and in our community. And so just walking through the phase plans real quickly that Governor Inslee laid out. In phase 1, he said that there's no in-person gathering. We're going to continue, now that we're in phase 1, we're going to continue our Sunday morning digital gathering, and we're going to continue our remote life groups. If you're not connected to a life group, I would encourage you, make this a priority in your life. Sunday morning is an important part of us growing in knowledge of the gospel together. Life groups provides a unique opportunity for us to grow in obedience to the gospel together. As we continue to do life, we know that content downloaded in our mind is not the only step of seeing heart transformation, but it's seeing that gospel truth that our minds have come to exalt and our hearts begin to exalt, that changes the things in our life. And so people have asked me, what does engagement look like in this time? And I'd say engagement looks like Sunday morning attendance, that you would make it a priority to lead your life and your family's life to watch these Sunday morning messages so that we can grow together in the knowledge and the truth of the gospel. Second is that you would find a life group if you're not connected to a life group, that you would prioritize the time with your life group, that not only you would be encouraged, but that you would bring encouragement into the life of others. Phase 2 for Governor Inslee allows for the connection with one other family per week. We recognize that limits some of the things that we can plan, and so we're going to put that back on you, that you would intentionally consider how you can serve and love one family each week once we roll into phase 2. That's going to be your space to own on how you're going to leverage that loosening of these social restrictions. We also recognize that for some of you, it would not be wise of you to step in due to high health concerns or being at high risk. And so we don't want to put you in a space that would bring unnecessary risk to your health. And so we're going to let you kind of own that space of how you're going to step into loving one other family per week as we step into phase 2. The earliest that this could happen, according to the governor's timeline, would be mid-June. Now, we're not guaranteed it's going to roll out mid-June, but that's the earliest that it could happen. Additionally, we typically take breaks during the summer with our life groups. We're not going to do that this summer. The reason we do it in the past is so that we can have a break for our leaders, because our community tends to travel more during the summer, and so attendance tends to decline. But we think that there's a unique opportunity this summer to rework what we're doing in our life groups just for the summer months and continue to grow in the gospel content, the content of the gospel, but also grow in gospel community. And so expect for some of that reworking to be laid out for you as we step into phase 2, into the summer months. It won't be the traditional life group that you're used to and life group experience, but we're going to try and intentionalize that and what that will look like through the summer months, focusing on the gospel content, but also on gospel community. Phase 3 is where we begin to see some loosening, where groups up to 50 people can gather. And at the earliest, again, the governor did not give us a timeline. He gave us phases, so he can turn the dial up or down as he sees indication and need to do so. Phase 3, the earliest that would be rolling into effect would be sometime in July, should everything go according to the direction that we would prayerfully hope that it would go. Phase 3 allows for groups up to 50. And so what we're going to do in phase 3 as a church, when the governor kind of moves us through the phases, that's what's going to flip the switch for us to step into our phases. Phase 3, we're going to have multiple services with RSVP, so for you to reserve online for you and your family, so that you can come and gather in a safe space where we have sanitization teams, where we have regular sanitization through the service, and where we have sanitization after following the service. We're going to have multiple services, restrict those services to be no more than 50 people, and we will not have kids' life in phase 3. We will allow kids to worship with families, and we'll do our best to make that a meaningful time for you and your family as we gather in person to worship and to study and to celebrate the Lord's Supper together. That's phase 3. There's no more than 50 people. There's going to be RSVP. There will be multiple services, and there will be no kids' life. Phase 4 would lift most restrictions, but here's what I'll say. Regardless of when we step into phase 4, we're going to continue to maintain good sanitization practices. We're going to continue to maintain the good practices that we've learned over the course of these last few weeks and months, and what we're going to learn over the course of the coming months. And so phase 4, whenever we would step into that, would lift the number of people that would gather in this space. And at that point, should schools reopen, we'll be rolling out Kids Life in that phase, so that families can have a space to drop off their kids and be able to continue to gather with adults and peers to worship. And so just to emphasize a couple things. Phase 2, the key thing to note is that we're going to continue to do life groups through summer, and we're going to rework life groups to make it mean the most to you as we continue to make gospel content an area of growing in our knowledge of the gospel and gospel community, so that we can grow in obedience to the gospel. And so we're going to emphasize that through the summer months. Phase 3, whenever we step into that, earliest would be sometime in July. We'll be having multiple services, RSVP opportunity online via the app, so that we can get a head count on who to prepare for in each of those services, and we'll provide as many services as we need to make sure that there's a space for you and your family to connect. And then phase 4 would lift those restrictions, but we're going to continue to maintain all the great sanitization practices that we've learned along the way. So that's kind of the phases. I'm going to continue to roll out some of that information in the weeks to come, but I just want you to hear from my mouth and my heart that our desire is to continue to be about the mission that God has entrusted to our church. Even if that means we're meeting digitally, if that means we continue to meet digitally, or if it allows us to meet in person. We're about the mission of God that He's entrusted to our church. Additionally, as it comes to our budget, another way that people have asked and concerned for our church, knowing the economic downturn of what's going on in our world today, is how is the church doing financially? And I want to say a couple things on that before I just share some numbers. The first is I've been so blessed by your faith and faithfulness. I know that every gift comes with sacrifice, and it comes with faith, but particularly in seasons like this, there is no gift that is given to the church that it does not require sacrifice and faith, trusting that God is going to be your provider. And I want to say thank you for your faith, for your sacrifice, and for your faithfulness. I've heard from some of you that you've given tithe based off of your tax return. I've heard from some of you that you're giving a tithe based off your stimulus checks. I've heard from some of you that you've increased the percentage of your gift each month to our church, knowing that there are families in our church that simply cannot give in this time due to the economic impact that their job loss or their decreased income has had on their home. And it's in times like these where we share in the burdens with one another by giving what we can, trusting that God will take that widow's mite or whatever it is that we give, and that he will use it to increase his gospel work through our church and continue the ministry in our church. And so thank you for that. Additionally, in addition to that, we have heard from a number of our church partners who have just given us excess gifts over the course of the last 4 months, knowing that many churches are impacted by the current economic situation, and they just have, in their own prayer and out of their own desire to be about the mission that God's doing in the Pacific Northwest, particularly through Summit Life Church, have written checks to our church that would be above and beyond what they had initially expressed their gifts would be. And because of those two things, I just want to say that the church is very healthy financially. We are doing fine. I am not losing any sleep at night regarding our church finances. Now, I want you to hear me. I have lost sleep at night because I care about you and your finances. But you have just been a tremendous encouragement and blessing to our church. And so thank you for that. We, in 2020, rolled out a budget where we had projected an increase in giving as we stepped down into our new building, become more visible and more permanent. That being said, we have not stepped down into our new building, and it has not been a permanent visible space for us yet. We believe that day will come, but it hasn't come yet. And we have, in our 2020 budget, we planned for about $80,000 in renovations. And so we've spent about $67,000 this year on our church renovations. And so it's just kind of, it's condensed to the beginning part of the year. We expect to be able to move into our space permanently soon. And so we've spent a good portion of what we had budgeted. We don't know what that final dollar amount's going to exactly look like, because some of these final tasks are based on hourly wages. But because we've kind of consolidated our expenses, particularly the $80,000 that we had projected to expend, our church is about a $57,000 deficit for the year, $67,000 spent on the church buildings. So you do the math. We seem to be continuing to move forward, operating pretty well within our budget, excluding some of our building expenses. And so that being said, we know that the economy and its impact on our church probably won't be fully felt until the next 3 to 6 to 9 months. And so I've been in contact with our stewardship team each month, upticked that conversation as we began to meet remotely. We're paying attention to what the Lord's doing in our church and the resources the Lord's entrusting to our church. And we want to lead from the front on stewarding well, being frugal. And so I've kind of presented to our stewardship team, and we're beginning to work through what it would look like if we need to roll out a budget that we're operating on 90% of what we had proposed for our 2020 in our meeting in December. What it would look like for us to operate on an 80 or so percent budget of what we had proposed, and what it would look like for us to operate on about a 60 to 65% budget based off of what we had proposed in 2020. I don't know if we're going to be in the full 90%, 80%, 65%, but I want you to know that we are willing to make whatever sacrifices we need to see the mission of God continue to be advanced through our church. Just like you are making sacrifices to see the mission of God advance through your stewardship, we as a church are committed to making the sacrifices necessary to seeing the mission of God advance through our church. And we're committed to the mission of God, regardless of whether we're at a 60% ratio of what we had projected, or a 90% ratio, or a 100% ratio, right? The Lord is the Lord of the harvest. Now, we trust him with the harvest. There's never been a day in my life where I have gone without. There have been days where I've been at need, but God has always been a faithful provider, and we trust him. during this time as a church. And then finally, a church building. We are excited to say that we are nearing the end of our renovations. The electrician expects to finish out his work in the next week and a half to 2 weeks. He has, because the band has allowed him to get back into the building, he's been working down at the building this week, and the flooring's in, the classrooms are ready. You've seen on Sunday morning some video footage from the space, and I'm just excited about what this space is going to provide for us as being a long-standing gospel presence in our community that's committed to reaching our neighbors with the gospel. I'm incredibly excited about where we're at with the building. I would give you kind of a guesstimate date in my heart where I'm shooting for, but you all know that my dates mean nothing. And so I'm going to trust the Lord with a date, but I'm pushing hard as I can to see some of these final items checked off of our list, and we're trying to be as frugal as we can as we cross the finish line, but still providing a space that's going to be very meaningful for us as we gather in groups of 50 and beyond, as the Lord would allow down the road. And so know that we are nearing the end. I can't wait to sit in the video to you doing my happy dance. It's a video you won't want to miss. It will be the happiest dance you've seen me dance in the last 2.5 years as we celebrate occupancy, but we're still a few weeks away from that. And so you got to at least stay tuned to the emails you get from me until you see the happy dance. That will be coming. Please know I'm praying for you. We trust God. We're committed to His Word and His gospel and His Great Commission work. And we will continue to be committed to that work, regardless of what the future holds, because we're committed to the one who holds the future. I'm praying with you. I'm praying for you. And know that I count the privilege to serve as your pastor. God bless.